Hello everybody, thank you for joining us today and welcome. I am Alex Gorbanov from 3Dots and CGschool. I will be a presenter today. Today's webinar is dedicated to the preview of 3ds Max Advanced Modeling class that we offer at CGschool. Early bird deadline for the first few classes is next week. This will be your last opportunity to receive up to $300 of each class. For more information, please check our website at www.thecgschool.com. That link you can see in the middle of your screen right now. And at today's webinar, during the next 80 minutes, I will demonstrate you the modeling techniques used in the creation of the 3D model of this white chair that you can see in the middle of this illustration. And I will demonstrate it from start to finish. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, what we want to do is to take a look at all reference image that we have for this project. And this time we have 7 reference images, so let's take a quick look at all of them. And all of these images, they give us plenty of information of what this chair looks like, so we can look at it from each side and basically understand what elements it's made of and see the size and proportion of it. So, and then we want to, having this information, we want to decide in which order we will model all the elements for this chair, or so to speak, we need to come up with the modeling plan. And I suggest the following plan. First, we need to model the rear and the front legs of the chair. Then we will create the frame seat that will connect all those legs. Then we will model this top element of the backrest of the chair. And then we will model the rest of the back of a chair. Then we will create these reinforcement bars in the middle, at the bottom. And finally, we will make a seat of this chair. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and prepare 3ds Max for our project. So open 3ds Max and start with a resetting interface so that you can start working with a nice and clean workspace. Go to front view and disable grid. Now also make sure that you're working in generic units. So go to customize unit setup and make sure that you're working not with millimeters or inches. You need to be working with generic units, which is basically just the numbers. So now what we need to do is to bring in the reference image for the first element that we're going to model, and according to our plan, that was the rear and the front legs of a chair, or specifically we will start with the rear legs. So let's go ahead and take a look at all reference images one more time and see which one works better for that. Now I suggest we use this one, and even though we see the armchair here, but essentially it's the same model of a chair. It's just got couple extra elements, this armrest and this extra element attached to the front leg that support that armrest, so which is not a problem for us. The reason why we want to use this particular image as a reference is because the rear leg is perpendicular to the view, so it will help us to outline this object with the splines in 3ds Max. So let's clean this image from extra visual information that we don't need by cropping it like this. You can use any image editing software that you have. It can be Adobe Photoshop, it can be MS Paint if you'd like. So the goal here is to get the image like that and save it out in a JPEG. So now you can bring this JPEG into 3ds Max and place it on a background so you can always refer to it. So in the front view, do the following. Go to Create Panel and create plane object of any size. You can also hide the selection brackets because we don't need it. Now for this plane object, go to Modify Panel and change number of length and the width segments to 1. Then go to Material Editor, and in any sample slot, just for the material in that sample slot, apply that JPEG image into the diffuse channel of that material so that we can stretch this image over this plane object. So go ahead and just double-click bitmap and pick that reference image that we just saved out, and that would be this one. Now don't click open right here. First memorize these dimensions of the image in pixels, which is in this particular case is 118 pixels by 350 pixels. Now we need to match the size of our plane object in units to the size of this image in pixels. So let's go ahead and do this. Once again, memorize these numbers. 118 by 350. So we're going to set 118 here and 350 there. So now the proportions of this plane object is correct in relation to the proportions of the reference illustration that we have. So let's go ahead and apply this material to this object and make sure it's visible in the viewport. So in the last step in the preparation of this reference image would be to go to top view and push it back along y-axis so that whatever object we create in the front view would not be coplanar to this plane object. So now we want to outline this rear leg of a chair with a spline. So go to Create Panel, go to Shapes menu and click this line button. So now you can create a line. Now use your favorite technique to outline this rear leg. The only thing I can suggest here, try to use as less vertices as possible, because it will be easier to adjust them later if you made a mistake. And I just want to show you my favorite technique, how I do it. You may follow it if you'd like. So I would use only 6 vertices like this to roughly outline this object with just the straight lines. Then I would go to Modify Panel, and then I go to Vertex Subobject mode of this editable spline object so that I can select all vertices and convert them into Bezier corner and start manually editing the curvature of each of these segments by adjusting these Bezier control handles. So that the goal here is to adjust the curvature of each of these segments to make the shape look like this. So you can take maybe a minute or two and try to make it as good as possible. So I don't want to spend too much time doing that. So let me open the scene where this shape is already perfected, and that would be this scene. Okay, so what you can see here is this outline in form of the editable spline. Now we want to give it some volume. We want to turn it from shape into the geometry. So let's go ahead and apply Extrude modifier. And of course give it some extrusion amount so that we can see it. Something like this. Now right away you can see that the level of detail of this object is not very good. Even though it looks sort of okay, the number of segments that divide these long curves is not enough. The object is still somewhat low poly, so we need to improve that. And the quickest way in this particular case would be just to go back to the line object and make sure you click this on the Modify panel. You click this button, Show End Result On Off toggle. The reason why is because we want to see this object as if all modifiers would have been applied to it. So click this button so you can always see the final result. Now go to this interpolation rollout, uncheck adaptive checkbox, and increase number of steps so that you can see you instantly changing the level of detail of the final object. So this is something that looks good, and now we don't want to stop there. We want to add nice and smooth filleted edges to this object. The reason why is because we're trying to do photorealistic model for our photorealistic renders, and just like in a real life, when chair like that is manufactured on a factory, it's getting all the edges of it are getting sanded on a sand belt, and all the edges look nice and smooth. We want to simulate the same effect in our model, because when later on when we will render it in in our renders, all these filleted edges, they will catch some nice reflections, some nice highlights. So the bottom line is that we want to add the filleted edges to this object. So let's go ahead and convert it into editable poly. Then go to Edge Subobject mode and select top edges here at the top of the object, this one edge in the middle, and 2 more edges here at the bottom. Now just zoom in closer to some of these edges and use the chamfer tool. Just click the settings button next to it. So that will bring the chamfer edges dialog, and adjust these two parameters, chamfer amount and segments, so that you can get this corner to look smooth, and it should look like fillet. So I think something like this would look just fine. Maybe increase the chamfer amount a little bit. So click OK, and now we're ready to add the fillets along the vertical edges of this object. Before we do this, let's go to Polygon Subobject mode and select this large polygon on the back and this large polygon in the front of this object. Now, keeping these polygons selected, go to front view, maybe zoom in a little bit closer, and use Insert tool to insert these polygons. Just bring up the settings, click the settings button to bring up Insert Polygon dialog, and use this Insert Amount spinner so you can insert these polygons just a little bit, just as much as you can see I inserted on my screen. So click OK when you're finished, and then just scroll up right here and look at this place. It's got some problems. All of these edges, they are overlapping right now after we applied Insert tool, and we want to fix that problem before we move on to the next step. So in this particular case, the quickest way to fix this would be to go to Vertex Subobject mode and select this group of problematic vertices, and then use the Weld tool. Just bring up the Weld Vertices dialog and increase this weld threshold parameter until you can see all these vertices, they just snapped into one. They just all welded together. So click OK and do the same operation to the second group of vertices, and maybe adjust it a little bit after that. And of course, make sure you do the same thing here at the bottom of the object. So let me do it real quick. Something like this and something like this. So when we fixed all those overlapping edges and piled up vertices, now we're ready to apply fillets along the vertical edges of this object. So let's go ahead and switch back to Edge Subobject mode. Select one edge here on the front of the object and one edge there on the back of the object. Then to help us select all other edges adjacent to it, we just need to click this loop button on the Modify panel, so that will automatically select all adjacent edges. And now we can basically use the same chamfer tool on the Modify panel, and you see that this chamfer edges dialog already remember the last set of parameters that we used to chamfer other edges. So that's pretty much what we want. So click OK, and now we have added the fillets to this object. But the problem is that now they are faceted. We need them to have a smooth look, and in this case we're gonna fix it by applying smooth modifiers from the list of modifiers, and just set this checkbox over outer smooth parameter, and you will see it's automatically applied the smoothing groups, and this object is already finished. So now we're ready to move on to the next step, and according to our modeling plan, we need to model the front leg of this chair. Now let's take a quick look at the reference image one more time and see which one we can use to bring it into 3ds Max. Now I suggest we use the same one. The reason why is because both legs, they are on the same illustration and they have a proper size in relation of one to another, and that will help us to get the 3D model that we're making, 3D model of the front leg, to make it to have a right side, right from the first try, and this will also help us to get the right spacing between the rear and the front leg. So let's go ahead and do this, and this time we want to crop a little bit more of this image, maybe this much, and we want to save this image again is in a JPEG format, and all we need to do is just in 3ds Max, we don't need to go through the process of creation the plane object and stretching material over it, all over again. We just need to select this already existing plane object and substitute the material assigned to it with the material with this new image that we just saved out, placed in a diffuse channel. So let's go ahead and replace image in a diffuse channel. So, and again, memorize the dimensions of the image in pixels, which is 228 by 337, so 228, 337, and match it right here, 228, 337. So here we go, we've got the new reference illustration on a background. So let's just reposition it a little bit. All right, and now we're ready to model the front leg. Now, let's go to perspective view and go to create panel, this extended primitives menu, and create chamfered box. Now at this point we don't care much about its size, so just make something that resembles the front leg, the chamfered box. And now we need to go to front view, and we can fine adjust all the parameters of this object. So place it side by side here with the illustration, and now you can adjust all these parameters. I would start with adjusting the fillet radius so that the radius of the fillet of the front leg matches to the radius of the fillets of the rear leg. You can just eyeball it, something like this, and maybe we need to increase the number of fillet segments. Now, using this illustration, we can adjust the width of this object, something like this. And of course, because the section of this object is square, so we can just copy this number right here and place it into this parameter. So, and I probably also need to, well, I definitely need to adjust the height of this object. So something like this looks good. Now, if we look at the reference images again, and just to get the idea of what the front leg of this object look like, we can say that it is first tapered toward the bottom, and it's also the bottom half of it also curved away, from the center, from the virtual center of the chair. So we're going to replicate this effect in our 3D model. So because we're going to be tapering this object toward the bottom and curving the bottom part of it, we need to give it some more segments along the height so that we can do that. So let's go ahead and increase number of height segments. Probably up to 22 is fine. Now let's go ahead and taper it. And for that, we're going to be using FFD, or a freeform deformation modifier. So pick FFD box modifier from the list of modifiers, and we need to increase number of dimensions here. So let's increase this height parameter up to 8. Click OK, so that will give us some more control points. Now, what we want to do is just maybe zoom in a little bit and go to control points subobject level of this modifier and select this bottom group of vertices. Now, using the scale tool, and make sure it's uniform scale, scale this selection of control points down so that you can scale down the bottom of the object. Now, repeat the same thing for the second row of control points. Maybe don't scale them too much, just a little bit less, something like this. So, and keep doing this for the next group of control points. So, and maybe a little bit for this next group. So now you can see that we tapered, we give it some tapered look toward the bottom. Now it's time to curve the bottom part away from the center of the chair. So, and the quickest way to do this would be to collapse everything to editable poly and go to vertex subobject mode and select this part of the object that we're going to curve. And I think, just to be precise so you can follow, 1, 2, 3, 11 vertices from the bottom. So while having these vertices selected, apply FFD 4x4x4 modifier, and you will see that it will be applied only to the selected vertices. Now go to control point subobject level and select this bottom group of vertices and use the select and move tool. Shift these vertices, along the x-axis to the right, just a little bit. Then select the second group of control points and shift them a little bit to the left. So, and maybe this third group of vertices, we can also shift to the left, just a little bit. So, okay, but now you can see from a perspective view that we only curve this object along x-axis, but in reality we need to also curve it along y-axis. And you can do it in the perspective view if you want. Just grab it by the y-axis and adjust all these groups of control points. But to get a little better result, I recommend to do this. Go to front view, select this bottom group of the control points, and because we shifted them to the right in the front view, then here in the top view, we can, same group of control points, we need to shift down. Now go back to the front view, select the second group of control points, and because we shifted it to the left from the top view, we need to shift it up like that. Now go back to the front view, and because we also moved this group slightly to the left, we also need to move it slightly up from the top view. So now you can see we have properly curved the bottom of this object. Let me collapse it into editable poly so you can see better. Something like this. And let's see what else we can do to it. Well, besides just position it to the proper distance from the rear leg using this illustration on the background and aligning it with the rear leg by the bottom edge using Align tool. So just click it and tell it that you want to align it to the rear leg using minimum coordinates of along y-axis. Click OK, so you can see that we aligned it here at the bottom. We can also optimize this object a little bit, because originally, you remember, we added some horizontal segments that divide this object because we wanted to taper and curve it. But now the upper half of this front leg is just a straight line, and we don't need this many segments right here. So let's go ahead and remove them. Go to Edge Subobject mode and select all these segments. Then let me switch to perspective view so you can see a little bit better. Now finish the selection of all adjacent edges by clicking this loop button on the modify panel. And now in order to remove these segments, just hold Control on the keyboard and then push backspace on the keyboard. You'll see it removes all these edges and also removes all the vertices attached to them. So that's it. We finished the front leg. And now for the next step, we need to space them out, to position, to create the front and rear leg on the other side of the chair, because so far we have only front right and rear right legs of the chair, and obviously we need to create left front and the left rear leg. And like in real life, it's just a mirrored copy of the legs on the other side. We want to do the same thing. We want to select these legs and use the mirror tool to mirror these guys along y-axis as instances. So click that, click OK, and now we need to space them out along y-axis. Now if you have a good eye and you can catch the good distance, then you can just eyeball it in the viewport. For those of you who don't feel quite confident just eyeballing it, I would recommend to do this. Go and take a look at the reference images, and like this one, for example, is a great one to use. Let's see what can help us to space, let's say, front legs one from another. And you can see that the distance from the outer edge of one leg to the outer edge of another one is approximately the same as the height of the front leg itself. And let me show you this other illustration that I prepared before this webinar for your convenience. You can see this, the distance A is equals to the distance B, and just using this information, do the same thing here in 3ds Max. Just move these guys one from another along y-axis until you see that the distance between the outer edges of the front legs is equally the same as the height of the front leg itself. So now when we've spaced the front legs, just go to top view and space these rear legs. And you know that chairs of the similar style that we're making usually have the distance between the rear legs usually smaller than the distance between the front legs. So don't forget that. Now when you space these guys, they also, of course, looking at this image, they need to be rotated. So in order to do the rotation quick, instead of rotating one object and then matching the rotation of the other one, you can do this because these are the instance copies, they're actually instances. you can do this. Just apply Edit Poly modifier, or if you have collapsed this object previously into editable poly, just go to subobject level. So the goal here is to go to element subobject mode, select this element that originally made up this rear leg, and rotate it using rotate tool. And you can see, because these are instances, the second instance will follow the same rotation. So when you rotated this object like that, you can just collapse everything into editable poly. So we keep the stack of modifiers nice and clean. So now you can see we have spaced front and rear legs properly. Now it's time to move on to the next step, and according to our modeling plan, it's the frame for the seat. And let me continue from a pre-saved file. And by the way, I haven't told you that yet, but you probably already noticed that I am working in a 3ds Max 2010. This is for your convenience, because later on in July, when we upload this video, and you can follow it if you missed something, I will also upload all these files for you. So those of you who haven't upgraded to the 3ds Max 2011 will be available to use all these files. And I also save in a lot of interim files for this project. So if you feel that you got lost on somewhere along the process, or you don't like the shape that you created, you can just open one of these files and continue from there. So let me open this one. Okay, and you see the same thing. We have a rear and the front legs finished and spaced. Then we need to go to top view and go to create panel and go to shapes menu and create a rectangle with which you need to connect these front and rear legs, something like this. Let me choose other colors so it's a little bit brighter, something like this, so you can see it better. Okay, now convert this rectangle into editable spline, and using all the tools that you have for the editable spline, just get this object to look like the outline of the seat frame if you were looking at it from the top. So just to make it quick and easy, let me go to vertex subobject mode and manually adjust the curvature of each of these segments by adjusting these Bezier handles. So something like this looks good. Now it's time to outline this object to give it some thickness. The quickest way would be to just go to spline subobject mode and use this outline tool. You don't need to use the spinner or input values manually. You can just click this button and interactively in the viewport, just click this spline and drag your mouse up and down until you see that the width of this frame looks good. So something like this looks good. Now we can extrude this object to turn it from the spline into mesh. So again, like we did for the rear leg, apply extrude modifier and apply some extrusion amount right here. So something like this looks good, but it doesn't look good enough. The reason why is because right away we can tell that the level of detail is not good. Again, we need to increase the number of vertical edges that subdivide all of those curved sides of the frame. And quickest way, again, just to go to editable spline object, make sure you click this button, show end result, and just uncheck this optimize checkbox in interpolation rollout and increase number of steps until you see that the level of detail of the subject is good. So now we need to apply the filleted edges to this object, and just like we did for the rear legs, it's something quick and easy. So let me convert it into editable poly, select this large polygon at the bottom and this large polygon at the top, just insert it a little bit, just some small value like that. Now then select four edges just like you see I'm selecting on my screen. Okay, and click loop button to finish the selection of adjacent edges, and use the same chamfer tool. Just adjust these parameters, chamfer amount and the segments, until you get this fillet look nice and smooth. Something like this. Looks great. And again, let me isolate this object so that we can see it a little bit better. Now you can see that again the fillets of this object are not smooth. They look faceted, so we need to fix that. And for that we're going to apply smooth modifier again. So apply it and set this checkbox auto smooth, so that will smooth out the object for you. But the problem is right now that now computer or 3ds Max, after we applied smooth modifier, think that this is one continuous smooth object, and in reality it is not. It's got these quite a sharp turn right here in the corner, and it will create these unneeded artifacts, and we need to get rid of them. We need to find a way to fix that, and the quickest way to fix that would be to collapse object into editable poly, go to top view, and go to polygon subobject mode and select all these polygons that belong to the rear and in the front surface of this seat frame. So now you can actually exclude these large polygons from the selection. Now while having these polygons selected, scroll down right here on the modify panel until you see the polygon smoothing groups rollout. On that rollout, you just need to click auto smooth button, and that will automatically assign all these polygons to the different smoothing groups. So by doing that, we have fixed all those artifacts in the corners, and now object looks right. So exit from isolation mode, and let's see what this object looks like. Well, I like the way it's entering and exiting from the front leg, but I don't like the way it's entering and exiting from the rear leg. Now, we need to fix that, and the quickest way would be to apply freeform deformation or FFD 2x2x2 modifier, and now you can just go to control point subobject mode, select these control points on the back of the object, and just manipulate them until you see that the object is entering and exiting from the rear legs properly. Now what else we can do is, you can see that this line formed by intersection of the seat frame with the rear leg is not quite parallel to the edge of the rear leg, and so we need to fix that as well. Let's select this one control points at the bottom and this another control points at the bottom. Now we need to push them toward each other, and the tool for that is the non-uniform scale. So just bring up transform, type in dialog, and scale these guys along y-axis. Just decrease this scale number until you see that this intersection line looks good. So that's what we want. And what else we can do for this frame object is to go to front view and maybe just adjust its placement on a chair a little bit. So, and let's go to perspective view and see, yeah, that's probably where this object would have been placed on the chair. Okay, so now we have finished the legs of this chair and the frame for the seat. Now it's time to move on to the next step and create the upper part of the backrest of a chair. Now let me tell you this. Those of you, let me close this image and open actual reference image. Okay, those of you who following the free videos at 3dots.com already noticed that a couple months ago I already demonstrated one of the techniques used in the creation of this element, and that time there was morpher modifier, which worked perfectly. It was quick and effective technique. This time I want to show you different technique which is equally fast and effective. So let's go ahead and continue. And again, let me, for those of you who haven't watched those videos, let me tell you that if you look at this backrest of a chair, this top element right here, you can see that it has two types of fillets. It's got some nice smooth fillets along all edges, and it has this large radius fillet along the top surface of it. And the reason why it got this large radius fillet is because when this chair is manufactured, the manufacturers, they wanted to person who sit on this chair to feel comfortable when they lean the back against the backrest. They don't want this sharp edge of the backrest to be irritating to you, so they heavily sanded it. And we want to recreate the same effect in our 3D model because, me personally, I think this is one of unique personality features of this chair, and we absolutely cannot skip it. So with that in mind, let's get back to 3ds Max and create that element. So let me continue with pre-saved scene, this one, which has all the same elements that you just saw a couple minutes ago, the legs of a chair and the seat frame. Now go to top view, let's prepare it a little bit. Select all these elements of the chair that we've made so far and rotate them clockwise 90 degrees. Oops. Like that. So that from the front view, oops, sorry. All right, so that from the front view, we can really see the front of a chair. Now we need to bring in the new reference image. So let's switch back to the reference images here, and we're going to use this one because again, we're looking head-on at that element and it doesn't look distorted, so we can just basically bring it into 3ds Max and outline it. So let's go ahead and crop this image this much, save it out as a JPEG, and bring that JPEG into Material Editor and stretch it over this plane. So move this plane object to the right. Now bring in the Material Editor and let's substitute the bitmap applied to the diffuse channel currently with the new one. So this image has a 264 by 234 pixels, so let's memorize it, 264 by 234, and match it right here, 264 by 234. So now it looks proportionally correct. Now another thing that we can improve right away is that you can see if we model this object right now using this reference image, it will be slightly off scale. So then when we're finished, we will have to scale it down because you can see it's a little bit too big. So let's scale this image down while we have this chance so that the object that we make will already have a good scale, so we can just move it and position it into place. So after we finish that, let's continue and outline this object in the front view with the spline. So go to Command Panel, this Create tab, and Shapes menu, and use the line command to create a line. You want to outline the right half of this object. And again, use your favorite technique. I'm just going to demonstrate how I usually do it. I usually just start with just with the straight lines and build something like that, so that I can go to Modify Panel and manually adjust all the vertices of this object to give them all the segments right curvature. And this is something relatively simple and fast, so let me just go ahead and take 5 seconds to do it. All right, something like this looks good. Now let me reveal a little secret here and just tell you that we're going to model this element using the compound object Loft. And as you know, Loft, because it's compound object, it needs components, and we're going to use this spline as a path. And also for the Loft object, we need the profiles, we need the shapes. So let's go ahead and create those shapes that we're going to loft along this. And because we have two types of fillets in this object, we will create two types of profiles, one with a small radius fillet and one with a large radius fillet, so that later we can just transform one small radius fillet into the large radius fillet. So let's go ahead and do it. Go to Create Panel and create a rectangle like this. Let me delete this one and create new one so maybe I can get a brighter color. All right. Yeah, something like this is good. Now create a rectangle like that. Now first step would be to reposition the pivot point of this object. So go to Hierarchy Panel and go to Affect Pivot Only mode, and now whatever you do, you will be applying all these manipulations to the pivot point. Now you want to use Align tool and align the pivot point of this object to the very top right corner of this object. So just let's use this Align tool and tell it that we want to align pivot point to the maximum value of the X and Y position of this object. So click OK, and you see we repositioned the pivot point of this object to the top right corner of it. So exit from Hierarchy Panel and now convert this object into editable spline. Now, being in editable spline, just go to vertex subobject mode, and using this fillet tool, fillet the left corner a little bit. Just give it some small radius like that. Now exit from subobject mode and copy this object down. Just hold shift on the keyboard and drag it down. Make sure you for the clone options dialog, you choose copy. It should not be instance. Make sure it's copy. Click OK and go back to vertex subobject mode and use the same fillet tool to fillet this other side, other top right corner of this object with the same small radius fillet. Now go back to this original profile and go to vertex subobject mode and use the same fillet tool, but this time give it some large radius, something like this. Okay, now let's optimize it a little bit. Let's go to segment subobject mode and delete these 3 straight lines at the bottom, 3 straight segments. Just select them and delete them. Do the same thing for this bottom profile. Go to segment subobject mode, select these 3 straight lines and delete them. Okay, so now when we finished all these splines that will be components of a loft object, let's go ahead and create the loft object. So I would select these three guys right here and isolate them so the viewport looks a little cleaner. So let's select this large line that represents the path and go to Create Panel, Component Objects menu, and click Loft button. So we enter the Loft Object creation mode. Now when you click Get Shape button and choose this profile that has 2 small radiuses, just click it, you will see that we lofted this shape along the path. Now obviously the orientation of this shape is not correct, so we need to reorient that. So for that, go to Modify Panel, go to Loft Objects, Shape Subobject mode, and select this shape in the structure of this loft object. It should be here in the beginning of the loft object, which is the beginning of the original path. So you can see you can do just rectangular window selection and the shape is there. Now use your favorite technique to rotate objects, but usually for the loft objects I make sure I click this angle snap toggle button and go to rotation, select and rotate mode, and then I can rotate this object 90 degrees. So when you're rotating it, make sure it's precisely 90.0. It's not 85 or 95. It should be 90. Now, when we reoriented this shape, now this object looks a little better. And now it's time to optimize it because obviously right now it's not very well optimized. It's got way too many segments right here and went to little segments along the long curves. So let's go ahead and go to Modify Panel, then go to Skin Parameters and click this Optimize Shapes checkbox that will optimize the shapes a little bit. They will remove extra segments along the straight lines. Then let's rotate this object so we can look at its back side and decrease these shape steps so that you get the right number of segments right here. We don't want to go too high with it because that would be just too many segments right here, and we don't want to go too low because it would create not enough segments to represent this little fillet. So I think something like this, the number of steps 3 would be fine. But here for the front fillet, we want to have more edges built into this curvature of this fillet. The reason why is because we're going to create a transition from the small radius into the large radius, and the loft object will do a little better job if number of segments for the large radius and for the small radius would be the same. So obviously if I increase these parameters right here, it will increase number of segments dividing those radiuses everywhere in this object, but we only want it to be applied to this specific edge. And in this case, to increase number of segments for this fillet would be to go to this shape that originally made up the profile of this loft object and go to segment subobject mode, select this segment right here and use divide tool on the modify panel to divide this object 2 times. Just set number 2 right here and click divide button. That will insert 2 additional vertices into the structure of this particular selected segment, and you will see that here on the loft object we increase number of segments built into this fillet on a final mesh. And that's pretty much what we want. And now optimization-wise, the only thing left to do is to optimize the path of this loft object. And the quickest way in this particular case would be just to reset number of path steps to 0, and that will make this shape look a little bit funny. But then we can go to this path subobject level, and you can see that the path is made up by the line object. Now for this line object, we can go to segment subobject mode and manually select each of these curves, like this one, this long curve right there, and use the same divide tool. Let me just reset it back to 1 and click it once, twice, 3 or maybe 4 times. So you can see we inserted more vertices into the curvature of that particular selected segment, and we optimized the level of detail of this object. So continue doing this for all the other curved segments. Just do the same thing. Just click it once, twice, or more times. And this last curved segment at the bottom. All right, so that looks great. You don't need to do anything to the straight line because it's just a straight line. You don't need to have any number of segments dividing it. Okay, so that looks great. Now it's time to create a transition from a small radius into the large radius. Now, first what we want to do is get back to shape subobject mode, and you remember that transition begins right here. Let's refer to the reference image quickly and see, okay, the transition begins approximately right there in this turn. So this shape is already selected, so you can go to move mode and grab this shape by the z-axis and just drag it along the path. It will be constrained to the path, and just drag it and stop dragging right there in the middle. So now we need to finish the transition approximately by this point right here. So we need to insert this profile into here so that loft object will know, okay, from that moment I need to keep lofting this shape. So if I click Get Shape button right now, this shape will be inserted in the beginning of the path, and this little yellow cross tells you that. So we need to position the little yellow cross right here to tell Loft Object that this shape will be placed right there. So let's go to Path Parameters, Rollout, and increase this path value until you move this little yellow cross to the place where you want transition to be finished. I'm trying to point it with my mouse cursor right here. So now if I click this Get Shape button and pick this shape with a large radius, the loft, oops, I'm sorry, the reason why that happened is because you remember I subdivided this segment twice. So we need to make sure that for this object, we also subdivide this large segment twice. So set 2 right here and click Divide button, so you will subdivide this large segment twice. Okay, now let's get back to the loft. So we're going to click Get Shape button and pick this profile so that loft continue lofting this other profile. Now again, this is it's not oriented correct, so go to Shape Subobject mode, select this shape and rotate it 90 degrees. So let's make sure this angle snaps toggle button is pressed. Go to Rotate and rotate this object 90 degrees. So now it looks a little better. So you can exit from the object mode, and you see now that we have finished the transition from a small radius into a large radius. And if you're not very happy with the way it looks, you can go to front view or perspective view, whichever you prefer, and adjust this transitional segment by just going into Shapes of Object mode, selecting all these shapes that made up this transition, and just manually dragging them by the z-axis along the path so you can modify the way this transition look. So that's how we make only the right half of the backrest. Now we obviously need to create the other half, then weld them together, then there will be openings, so we need to cap them before we can bend this object. So let me continue from the pre-saved file. Okay, so basically what you see here is the same thing that you just saw 1 minute ago. The right half of the backrest is ready. and now we need to mirror it and weld both halves together. So let's convert this loft object into editable poly, because from now we want to work with it as an editable poly. You can delete all these splines because we don't really need them anymore. Now in this particular case, you can mirror this and weld at the same time with using a symmetry modifier. So let's go ahead and apply symmetry modifier. Adjust the mirror gizmo of this modifier so that you can see there is no gap right here, so that the objects are welded here in the middle. All right, so something like this looks good. Now convert this object into editable poly, and now you can see that we need to also apply fillets to these two bottom corners right here. This is something we've done multiple times already, so let me just do it real quick. Go to Edge mode, Subobject mode, select these two edges, click Loop button on the Modify panel so that you can select all adjacent edges, and use the same Alt chamfer tool to create the nice fillets at those corners. Something like that looks good. Okay, so now we can go to border subobject mode of this object and select all borders. You can use the window selection or just push Control A on the keyboard and click this cap button on the modify panel, so that will cap the openings of this object. Now you can see it's no longer, we can no longer see through it. Now it's solid. And now it's time to subdivide this object, because if we try to bend this object as is right now, it's not going to work. So let me quickly demonstrate it to you. First, I want to position pivot point to the center of this object. Now you can see if I apply bend modifier and try to bend this object, it's not going to work because this large polygon doesn't have any vertical edges that will subdivide it, so it doesn't look nice. Now, so again, we need to find a way to subdivide this object into the smaller polygons before we can bend it. And again, those of you who are following our free videos at 3dots.com already saw that you can do it with this nice modifier called subdivide. It does great job subdividing this object into the smaller triangles, something like this. And this is a great tool when you need to subdivide object. But if you are working in 3ds Max 2010 or 2011, there is also another tool that does a great job subdividing object. That is a modifier called Quadify Mesh. And let me demonstrate to you how you do it, how you can subdivide this object with that specific modifier. And basically, it will be up to you again to decide which method you want to use. You want to subdivide it with subdivide modifier, or you want to subdivide it with Quadify Mesh modifier. So keep in mind though that Quadify Mesh work with the editable mesh objects. So first we need to convert this into editable mesh, and then we can apply Quadify Mesh modifier. So you can see that it does a good job subdividing this object into smaller polygons, and it's trying to maintain four-sided polygons. Of course, where it can do so, where it cannot do so, it's still placing all of these triangles. So let's see, maybe we can make the quad size smaller. Yeah, I think this looks good. So we have subdivided this object, and now we can convert it to editable poly. And now we can bend this object. So go to top view, go to vertex subobject mode, and select just a couple vertices at the very end of this object. Okay, and do the same at the left side of the object. Just select just a couple vertices at the end. So now zoom out so you can see entire object, and go to soft selection rollout and set this use soft selection checkbox. Now increase fall off parameter so that you can also partially select all other vertices of this object. Now you can see the selection of the vertices is represented by the different colors. Those that have a sort of hot colors are more selected than those vertices that have cold colors. So now when we apply bend modifier, you can see if I try to bend this object, I am bending the selected vertices, and I am partially bending partial selected vertices. So let me get back to editable poly, maybe increase fall off parameter a little bit and go back to bend modifier. So now let me see how this object look. Okay, this is what it looks like in 3ds Max, and this is what it looks like on the reference images, and looks like we did a good job bending this object, and that's exactly what we need. So now we can only fix the smoothing of this object, because again you can see the polygons have this faceted look. And again, this is something that can be fixed very easily. You can apply smooth modifier like we did for some other objects from this project, but we can also just go to polygon subobject mode, select all polygons, and scroll down here on the modify panel, and on a polygon smoothing groups rollout, just click auto smooth button, and that will assign the smoothing groups to all selected polygons. So the bottom line is that we've got the same nice and smooth results as if we have applied smooth modifier. And let me continue from pre-saved file. Yes, so after you bend this object, it will look like this, and it's exactly what we want. So now only thing that you need to do is to grab this object and position it to where it's supposed to be on a chair, which is at the top of these rear legs. Now go to left view, and you will of course need to rotate it a little bit so that placement looks correct. So you might want to take your time, maybe 30 seconds or 1 minute to adjust the position of this object. So, and you will end up with the situation like this. The rear legs are finished, and the front legs are finished as well. The seat frame is finished, and this top element of the backrest of a chair is finished as well. Now, according to our modeling plan, we need to create these other elements of the back of the chair, which are this horizontal bar and this flat element right there. And this is something very easy, very straightforward process. So let me don't spend too much time demonstrating you that, and just give you the idea in the first couple steps, and then you can easily just do it by yourself. So this horizontal bar, if we look at the reference image, well, obviously it's connecting the rear legs between each other, and it's also slightly curved. So in order to build this element, we can just go to create panel, extended primitives, and create the chamfer box object approximately, I don't know, this big. Then adjust all the parameters of it. You know, it definitely needs to be a little bit wider. Okay, and because we are going to bend this object, we need to subdivide it along the length. So just increase the number of segments so that it looks a little more, you know, detailed right there, so you can bend it. Okay, so this element is out of equation because it's very easy and very straightforward process. Now, this flat element right here, we can make it from a splines, then extrude it, and then apply filleted edges. So let me just give you the idea how you can create this shape real quick. So go to shapes menu of the create panel and create an ellipse with which you can outline this opening on this object. So now you can also convert it into editable spline. Go to spline subobject mode, and use an outline tool. You can just you know, keep modifying this object. Then use a different spline creation and modifying techniques that you know. Combine some splines together, delete some parts of it, so that the goal here is to, let me just show you maybe a couple more steps. You can see that I'm trying to create this bottom part of this element. Then you can use, like I mentioned, multiple spline editing techniques to keep editing the spline. So the goal here is to get the shape that looks like this. So let me open the file where this shape is already finished. So this shape should look like that. So only thing that is left to do for this shape is just something that we already did for rear leg and seat frame. Just basically extrude and optimize it. Extrude just for the sake of seeing this object as a mesh. And now go back to spline subobject mode and dividing some segments or playing with this optimize parameter. Just optimize this shape to give it a good level of detail. And once you finish to giving it a good level of detail, you can collapse it into editable poly and go through the same steps that we went through, applying fillets to the all other elements. Just insert all those large polygons on the front and on the back. Select all the edges that you want to apply fillets to and use the chamfer tool of editable poly modifier to create a nice and smooth fillet. So let me open the scene where all those operations already finished. Let me see. It's this file. All right, so you will end up with a shape like this. So this is our bar, and this is this flat element that you can see already extruded, and it's got optimized, and it's got already all the filleted edges to it. So now the only thing that is left to do is just put it into place. So you can just grab these two guys right there and put it where they're supposed to be. Now this horizontal bar, like I mentioned, we need to apply bend modifier to it. Maybe just bend it a little bit and position it into place like that. Of course, rotate it a little bit. And this element, again, there is nothing too special about. Just position it where it's supposed to be, and switching between the different views, front view, top view, left view, whichever required. You can just position it correctly. And of course, you might want to scale it up and down a little bit to get this object to look as close as possible to its reference illustration. So let me open the scene where all of that is done. Well, actually, we already have it done. But still, I want to continue with this file. So here we have the front and rear legs finished, the seat frame is finished, and also the top and all other elements of the back of the chair is finished. Now, according to our modeling plan, what needs to be modeled next are these reinforcement bars, or I should say all of these reinforcement bars on the sides and on the back of a chair, and this footrest bar, if I can call it like that, on the front of a chair. And this is again something absolutely simple. Let me demonstrate you how it's done with just only one reinforcement bar, and you can easily continue making the rest of them. So go to Create Panel, go to Shapes menu, and create a line with which you connect rear and the front leg of a chair. Now we want to turn this spline into geometry, so for that go to Modify Panel. In the Renderings rollout, set this checkbox over Enabling Viewport parameter, so that will give it now geometric appearance. Now increase the thickness parameter so that you can give it some diameter, and of course you need to increase number of sides a little bit so that it looks a little bit more, level of detail looks a little bit better. So now when we finished with the thickness, this looks like a tube. However, this reinforcement bar right here, you can see that it looks tapered toward the ends, and now we want to recreate the same effect. So go back to the 3ds Max, and before we can taper it, we need to subdivide it along the length. And the quickest way would be right here on the Modify panel for the editable spline object, is to uncheck this Optimize checkbox and increase number of steps so that we give it somewhat more, vertical edges dividing this object. So I guess 23, maybe 24 would be good. Now collapse this object into editable poly, and now in order to taper the ends of this object, we can apply FFD 4x4x4 modifier and just go to Control Points, Subobject Level, and select this group of the control points at the right side and scale them down uniformly so that you can create this nice tapered look toward that end. And repeat the same operation here at the left side. Just scale those guys and actually select them and scale them down a little bit. So we've given this object a tapered look. Now the only thing that is left to do is to, of course, align it with the middle of the front leg, because that's how it's connected to the front leg. And now we need to connect this guy to the rear leg. So in order to speed things up and avoid all of those manipulation with rotation and move, quickest way here would be to apply FFD 2x2x2 modifier, so that now you can go to control point sub-object mode and select these control points on the back of the object and just slide them along x-axis until they connect the rear leg at the proper place. So that place is right there, almost along the edge. So I'll do the same. I'll connect it right there. So using the same technique, model all other reinforcement bars. You don't need to create the spline all over again. You can just simply copy this object and keep manipulating it with the FFD modifier. So doing that, just populate this chair with all the reinforcement bars and the footrest in front, and you will end up with the object looking like this. So you can see what we have right now is the model of a chair where we have the front and the rear legs finished. We also have all the elements of the backrest of a chair finished. We have this seat frame, we have all those reinforcement bars, and now it's time to model very last element of this chair is a seat. This is probably the most time-consuming step in the creation of this model, and in order to don't spend too much time, let me just create a quarter of it so you can create all the rest of the seat of this chair. So what I want to do is to first delete all the reference images that I don't need anymore to have only this geometry in my scene. Now I want to attach all these objects together using this attach tool of editable poly. So I want it to be one object. Now what we want to do is make a copy of this object. So just push Ctrl V on the keyboard, make sure you're making a copy, not an instance. Click OK and go to isolation mode so that we can work with this copy of this object. Now using the slice modifier, slice off all the geometry of a chair that is above the seat frame and that is below the seat frame. So let me just copy and paste the same modifier and change a couple parameters here so that I can do this. So now when you sliced off the geometry that is above and below the frame of the seat, from the front view, from the top view, you can see this frame as a guide for the size and the scale of the seat of the frame. Now let's apply cap holes modifier to cap those holes that we created in the front and the rear legs. So this object looks a little bit better from the top. Okay, so having this object as a reference, let's go ahead and create the seat. Now we are going to create, let's take a quick look at the reference image to see how the seat is made. Well, you can see that this seat is made by all of those sort of ropes, or I should call it probably, I don't know, fibers if I can, not sure what's the proper name for those guys, but let me call them ropes. So we're gonna make them with splines, and the quickest way to make all those splines would be to extract them from the editable poly object. Now let me show you how it's done. Go to create panel, go to standard primitives menu and click plane button to create a plane. Now with this plane we're going to cover this entire seat. Now make sure that your plane object is square, not rectangular. This is very important. It needs to be square, and the way to do it is to position your mouse cursor in the middle of the seat frame, hold shift on your keyboard, click left mouse button, and drag your mouse until you see that you created this plane object that completely covered the seat. Okay, now make sure that you go to modify panel and increase number of length and width segments to 2, so the object looks like this. Convert it into editable poly, go to polygon sub-object mode, select these 2 top polygons and delete them. Now go to vertex sub-object mode, select 2 vertices at the top left and the top right sides of the object. Using this 2.5 snap toggle button, just press it and move these objects down along y-axis until you snap them to the bottom right and bottom left vertices. Now there are 2 superimposed vertices right now at each side, so we need to weld them. So select those guys and use weld tool to weld them. You can see before 6 and after 4 vertices, so obviously we weld everything that we need. Click OK. Now let's create some more edges that later we can turn into splines. So go to Edge Subobject mode, select all edges. You can just push Ctrl A on the keyboard and unselect this middle one, and using Connect tool, just click the settings button next to Connect button to bring up the Connect Edges dialog and increase number of segments up to, well, it depends how thick you want those ropes or the fibers to be, and I don't know, if you have very powerful computer, you can go as high as 40 or 50. But if you don't feel that you have a quite powerful computer, or just for the sake of moving objects faster in the viewport, let's use 30 for this particular case. So 34. Okay, so click OK. We've created 34 more vertical edges on each side of the subject. So add this middle edge to the selection, and now we need to turn these selected edges into splines. So click Create Shape from Selection button, and now in this dialog, make sure you choose Smooth and click OK. So what you do now is you extracted all these edges and turn them into spline. So let's exit from subobject mode of our plane object and delete it. So now what we see on our screen is basically are the splines. And the reason why we see them as geometry is because last time when we created a spline, we turned it into, we set this checkbox right there. This checkbox for enable and viewport parameter, and if I uncheck it, you can see all these splines. So anyways, let's bring back this checkbox and decrease thickness parameter until you see that there is no gap between each of these individual splines, and they also not overlapping with each other. Don't go too far with this parameter. We don't want them to intersect. So something like this would be good. Now we also need to lower this number of sides maybe down to 8, because even though we don't care at this point much about how many polygons we spend on the subject, but we still don't want to go too crazy with that. We don't want to have 2 million polygons for the subject. And when we decrease the number of sides that made up these splines, we also need to increase this threshold parameter so they look smooth. Doesn't matter how many sides they have. Now go to rotate, activate this rotate tool, and while holding shift on the keyboard, rotate this object 90 degrees, and when you release mouse button, you'll be asked to make a copy of this object. So click OK, and here we got the copy of it. Now you need to reposition it the same way you see I do reposition it on my screen. Just make sure it's exactly the same way so that the sides of these splines, they form a sort of zigzag line. So something like this. And repeat the same thing 2 more times to create other sides of the seat. So here I get another one, reposition it, and here I get one more. Okay, so something like this is good. And the reason why we wanted to position it like that is because we're trying to simulate this effect when they interweave between each other along the diagonals. Now we can uncheck this checkbox for all of these splines, this enable and viewport parameters, so we can bring them back to their linear appearance. Now we need to select all these splines, and while having them selected, we need to reposition them so that these virtual diagonals of the structure, these diagonals going through the centers of the front legs. You can see this virtual diagonal going through the center of this front leg, and the same thing happens on the right side. So now when we finish that, you can see that we shifted the center, this virtual center of intersections of the diagonals, we shifted it off the center of the seat frame. Now we need to fix that. We're going to use this magical FFD 4x4x4 modifier. So let's go ahead, just apply it to the selection of splines and go to control points subobject mode and select this central group of control points and shift it a little closer to the center of the frame. You don't need to be, exactly, you don't want it to be exactly in the middle. That's fine if it's a little bit off, but just to improve it a little bit. So something like this looks good. Now we can collapse everything back into editable splines. So now we've got all of these 4 spline objects. Now what we want to do next is to make sure they are not going through the seat frame. We want to trim all these splines along the inner edge of the seat frame. So let me demonstrate you the quickest way to do it. So go to Create Panel, go to Shapes menu, and create an arc that goes from this corner to this corner, and it follows almost parallel to the edge. Make sure you don't create this arc to follow exactly the inner edge. You want it to be a little bit shifted to the left, something like this, just slightly. Now we want to select this side of the seat, and we want to attach that arc to it. So click Attach button and attach it to it. Now let me isolate this object so you can see it better. Now what we want to do is go to Spline Subobject mode and use this on the Modify panel, use this Trim command to trim all these splines here at the right side of this arc object. So just click the side that you want to remove, and you can see that all these splines will be automatically trimmed to that arc object. Now it's going to take you a couple minutes, so let me don't do this to all objects to speed things up. I think you get the idea, so you can easily do it for the rest. Those splines that all of these splines that are outside, they can be completely deleted, so just delete them. Repeat these operations for all 4 sides, all 4, I guess I can call them quarters or quadrants of this seat. You will end up with a shape like this. So let me open the file where this structure of the spline objects is already trimmed. So you will see something like this. Let me change their color so you can see these guys a little better. Okay, now what's left to do is to bend these splines a little bit, because according to this reference image, let's see if I can find maybe another one that demonstrated better. Yeah, this one. You can see that they also bend. They rise up right here, and then they go down toward the middle. And here, along the edge of the seat frame, they bend over some solid frame. So we want to simulate that by bending those splines. So let me, like I mentioned previously, let me demonstrate you how you can do it to just the 1/4 of the seat, so you can easily repeat the same operation for the rest of the chair. So let me isolate this object right here, go to Spline Subobject mode, and delete this arc right here because we no longer need it. Now select all splines, and on the Modify panel, make sure you set this Connect checkbox in the Connect Copy group. Now, while holding Shift on the keyboard, drag all these selected splines down, and what you see happen is that you created the copy of all your selected splines, and you also create these vertical lines that connect the copy with the original set of splines. Now, the goal of doing that, the whole purpose was to just get these vertical lines. So delete those splines that you just copied and leave only this original splines and the vertical lines. Now we need to weld all the vertices. The reason why is because right now where the horizontal line meet the vertical one, those vertices are not welded, and you can see I'm showing it to you. So just click Ctrl A on the keyboard, and without changing anything on the parameters of the weld command, just click weld, and you will see all those vertices are welded. Now go to top view, and all of these horizontal splines that you see, just in your mind virtually break them down into 3 groups. First group will have short splines, second group will have medium length splines, and a third group will have long splines. Now go to Segment Subobject mode and don't do anything to the splines that belong to the short group, and all the splines that can be classified as a medium long, just select them. I think it can be this group of splines. Okay, and divide them once by using divide command. Just set number 1 here and divide them in the middle. Then select all the splines that belong to the long group and divide them twice. Just set number 2 here and click divide button. So now the reason why we want to do it is because when we will bend the spline, we want to give a little bit of help to the bend modifier. It will feel more comfortable bending long splines when they have several segments. Now select all of these vertical lines, segments, and make sure they're typeset to line, because we don't want to bend those guys when we apply bend modifier. Then invert selection, and all of these segments, make sure they're typeset to curve. So now, having these segments selected, go to top view and apply bend modifier. Now, once you apply bend modifier, rotate its gizmo and reposition it a little bit so the right edge of the gizmo is going almost like virtually parallel to the right edge of the seat, something like this. And also reposition the center of the gizmo just slightly closer to the right edge, something like this. Now you can see that if I try to bend this selection of segments in the front view, in the perspective view, you can see that I'm bending them exactly like I need it. And those vertical lines, because they're typeset to line, they are not affected. So we want to bend it like this. You might want to memorize this bend angle, because when you will bend all the other quadrants of the seat, you want to bend them, correctly. So you want to use the same number. So when you bend this object like that, collapse it back to the editable spline, and what's left to do to this object is just to turn all these corners right here into fillets. And this is something can be done really quickly. Just go to vertex subobject mode, select the group of vertices that you need to fillet like this, and just basically using the fillet command on the modify panel of editable spline object, just fillet them. You can do it manually like that. So do the same thing to the other groups of vertices that you want to apply fillet to, and make sure when you select a group of vertices, you don't include the vertices that are connected to very short edges, because you don't want to limit your ability to apply fillets. So apply fillet to this group of vertices, and then what else left? Right, this group right here. So let me just select those, unselect those that I do not need, and again, do not select vertices that are attached to the very short edges, and create a fillet. So, and then when you finish applying fillets, large radius fillets, you can just manually apply fillets to these small segments right there. Really short splines like that with a very short segment here at the top, you can completely delete, because we don't want it to be there. Okay, so now you can see if I turn these splines into geometry by bringing back this checkbox, it already looks like a sort of ropes. And imagine you're doing this for the all other quarters of the seat, and when you put them together, they will look like interweave in the middle. Now, the only thing I can recommend else to do to this object is eventually, of course, you will decide to apply materials to this object, and it's not a secret that it will be not very easy to texture, because right now this object, you can see it's made up by 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on individual splines. But if you go to vertex subobject mode and use connect command to connect all these splines here at the bottom in this fashion, just select and connect every other pair of vertices, and on this other side just skip first one and do something like this. So what we're trying to simulate is that now this, instead of multiple single splines, we have one continuous zigzag looking spline, and when you turn spline into geometry, it already comes with the texture and coordinates. So all you want to do is just to apply material to it and adjust the the UVW coordinates of it so the material is properly stretched. Texture is properly stretched over the object. So after you do all that to all the quarters of this object, this is what you will end up with. This is what the seat looks like after all of those splines turn into geometry. I think it looks good. So only thing that is left to do is to convert all these guys. And by the way, because they're splines, you can control their level of detail with this parameter right here. So all that is left to do is just convert these splines into editable poly, attach them all together, and you can see that there's still a little bit of a gap between the seat frame and the seat. So we can fix that by applying, guess which modifier? course, it's FFD 4x4x4. So let's go ahead and apply it. And you can just control these groups of control points to get rid of this gap. Just manually adjust it at the places where it requires adjustments. So, and then after you do that, let me just move on, so we're already running out of time. All that you will have to do is just slice off that extra geometry at the bottom that we don't want to, stick out too much here at the bottom. So you can just apply slice modifier and do something like that. So now you can see that we've got this nice seat, and just to demonstrate you that the texturing, that procedure that we do at the bottoms of the editable spline objects, it really helped with the texture, and you could see that the texture is nicely and evenly spread over the surface of these ropes. And I think we almost finished the model. So the only thing that is left to do to this model is just to attach everything together, then break it into different material IDs, apply materials, scale this object up to the right scale. You can switch the unit system to inches or meters, depends on which unit system you prefer to use. Then give it a proper name, save it out, and maybe bring it into the rendering studio, because it's always nice to have a render that you can place along with the object into your objects library, so that later on when yourself or somebody else working on a project and they flip through all the furniture models that you have in your local drive, and instead of opening file and see what the model is, they can just open a simple image and see, that's what the model looked like. I myself always do that. I never use really complicated scenes. I create the simpler possible scene with a couple lights. I bring this model in, apply simple materials, and do the render. So here you can see this particular example of this image rendered in the simplest possible studio. I suggest you to do the same. So if you want to learn more, please sign up for our 3ds Max Advanced Modeling class, where during 2 days of intensive training, you will learn all tips and tricks with editable spline, editable poly. You will learn all modeling modifiers and their practical application. We will put all tools under the microscope and analyze them and learn how to use them quickly and effectively. So after 2 days, you will be ready to take on any object that you might need for your interior project, whether it's a sofa or table, ceiling fan, or a small accessory. You'll be able to make it quickly and effectively. Again, my name is Alex Gorbunov. Thank you for joining this webinar today. See you next time. Bye.